I still remember the smell of fresh lacquer that morning. I'd been in my workshop early, polishing the last piece of oak I'd been shaping all week, a simple coffee table, nothing fancy. Just clean lines, honest grain, something solid that would last. Kind of like how I raised my daughter. Her name's Julia Hale, 32. Smart, ambitious, sharper than any chisel I ever owned. And that night she was hosting the launch party for her startup, something about eco-design, sustainability, modern living. I didn't really understand all the tech talk, but I understood pride. My girl had worked hard. I put on my one good suit, navy, a little tight around the waist now, and took the train into Boston. The kind of place that smells like ambition, glass towers, espresso, and 100 people in a hurry. I felt out of place, but that's fine. I've been out of place since the day I lost my wife, Margaret, 8 years ago. Julia was 24 then, still finding her footing in the world. I promised myself I'd never let her feel alone. Maybe I promised that a little too hard. When I reached the hotel, I stopped outside the revolving doors just to take it all in. The banner said, Hale Studio Launch, building the future of workspaces. The future. My daughter was building the future. Inside, everything gleamed. Soft jazz, champagne glasses, little lights dangling from the ceiling like stars caught in glass. The kind of beauty that costs money. I felt my heart swell when I saw her, Julia, standing by the stage, sleek black dress, hair pinned up, smile rehearsed. My little girl who used to run barefoot in sawdust was now the CEO of something I didn't even have the words for. She saw me before I could wave. And for a split second, her face lit up. The same light I'd seen when she got her first paycheck, when she won that scholarship, when she built her first desk beside me in the shop. But then just as quick, she adjusted her smile, that polite kind of smile you use when you're trying not to offend someone. "Dad," she said, walking over, her heels clicking like clock hands. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it," I said. "You look incredible, Jules. Your mom would be proud." "Thanks, Dad," she said quickly, glancing around. "Listen, just maybe try not to, say too much tonight, okay? The guests can be intense. I just want everything to go smoothly." I blinked. "Not say too much." "You know what I mean," she said softly. "You tend to tell long stories about wood and hammers and how everything used to be made by hand. It's cute, but maybe just enjoy the evening." It wasn't cruel, it wasn't even angry, just dismissive, the kind of tone you use when you think someone doesn't quite belong in the room. I smiled anyway. "Sure, honey, I'll behave." I followed her to a table near the front. People in suits were laughing, talking fast, shaking hands. I felt like the only man there who still owned a landline. A young guy in a gray blazer turned to Julia and said, "Is this your father?" Julia smiled nervously. "Yes, this is Richard. He's kind of old school, doesn't really get all this startup stuff." The group chuckled politely. My ears burned. I took a sip of water, pretending not to notice. "That's okay," I said lightly. "I don't get much these days except a good piece of oak and a quiet afternoon." More laughter, louder this time, but not the friendly kind. The kind that fills silence when people don't know what else to do. Julia's cheeks flushed pink. "Dad," she said quietly through her teeth, still smiling at them. "Let's just enjoy the food, okay?" I nodded. "Sure thing, sweetheart." Dinner came, tiny portions, fancy names. The waiter placed a small square of something on my plate. "Beet reduction with microgreens," he said. I looked at it for a long second. "You got anything bigger?" I asked. The table laughed again, louder now. Julia didn't. She stared down at her wine glass like it might save her. A man across the table, someone from her investor group, I think, leaned forward. "So, Mr. Hale, Julia tells us you're a craftsman. You must have passed that work ethic on to her." I smiled, grateful for the question. "Well, I don't know about work ethic, but I did build her first desk. Right there in my workshop. Took me a week." The man laughed. "You built her desk?" "I did," I said, proud. "Solid oak, you could stand on it, it wouldn't even creak." He raised his glass. "So you built the foundation of her company, huh?" The others laughed loud, showy laughter, but this time it wasn't good-natured. I could see Julia's jaw tighten. She looked away. And in that small, airless moment, I realized something painful. This room wasn't built for people like me. I wasn't the proud father tonight. I was the joke that made everyone else feel modern. The noise around me faded, just like it used to when I worked alone at midnight. I looked at Julia, my little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who once carved her initials next to mine on the old workbench. Now she couldn't even look at me. I took a slow breath, forced a smile, and lifted my glass. "You've come far, Jules," I said. My voice was steady, but inside I was breaking. "Just remember, respect is free, but losing it is expensive." The table fell silent. For the first time that evening, nobody laughed. Julia looked up at me, her lips parting like she wanted to say something, an apology maybe, but she didn't. The band started playing again. Conversation picked back up, thin and nervous. I sat back and finished my drink. After dinner, I stepped outside for air. The city lights blurred a little, maybe from the wind, maybe not. Boston nights are colder than they used to be. I pulled my coat tight, thinking about Margaret. She used to tell me, "One day, Richard, your kindness is going to hurt you." She was right. Through the glass doors, I could still see Julia. She was laughing again, surrounded by people who thought they knew her story. She looked confident, radiant, even the kind of woman the world respects. And I realized something cruel but true. They'd never know how many nights her old man stayed up fixing her prototype, sanding her wooden frames, wiring her lamps. They'd never know who taught her to care about craftsmanship before she cared about investors. I walked away from the hotel before the speeches began. I didn't want to hear her talk about innovation and independence. Not tonight. Not when I still had her old drawings folded in my wallet, the ones where she'd written "Hail Designs, me and Dad." I found a bench a few blocks away, sat down and looked at my hands. The calluses were still there, but lighter now, softer. 40 years of building furniture, 40 years of shaping something out of nothing. And yet in that room full of applause and champagne, I'd never felt smaller. But I wasn't angry, not yet, just hollow. There's a certain kind of pain that comes when someone you love starts to see you as an inconvenience. It doesn't explode, it just settles in your bones, quiet, heavy, permanent. I sat there a long while until the streets emptied. Somewhere inside the hotel, I heard the muffled sound of clinking glasses and laughter. I imagined her up there on stage, thanking everyone but me. That's when I made a promise to myself. If she wanted independence, I'd give her all the space she needed. If she thought I was old-fashioned, I'd show her what tradition really meant: responsibility, dignity, legacy. And if she believed she built everything alone, then maybe it was time she learned what really happens when the foundation walks away. The quiet kind of revenge doesn't come from anger. It comes from love that's finally had enough. I stood up, brushed the dust from my coat, and walked toward the train station. The city was asleep, but my mind wasn't. Every step echoed like a nail being driven into something I hadn't built yet, something new, something final. By the time I got home, the house felt different. Quieter than usual, but cleaner somehow, like the air after a storm. I went into the workshop and turned on the light. The smell of sawdust filled the room. Margaret's picture sat on the shelf above my tools, watching me like she always did. "You were right," I whispered. "Kindness hurts. But maybe it's time I stopped confusing kindness with silence." I picked up my hammer, not because I had work to do, but because it felt right, the weight of it, the honesty of it. My whole life was built on wood and patience, and maybe it was time to build something else, something for me this time. As the clock hit midnight, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and raised it toward the empty chair across from me. "To you, Jules," I said softly, "you've come far, but you're about to learn how far I can go too." Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks of the old shop door. I smiled. There's something cleansing about the sound of wind. It erases the noise of people who don't know what they've lost. And maybe that's what this was, the start of silence before the reckoning. If you've ever been the kind of parent who gave everything, time, sweat, years, only to be treated like a relic, stick around. Because this story isn't about revenge. It's about dignity and how sometimes walking away quietly is the loudest thing you can do. When I think back on my life, it always starts with the smell of pine. Not perfume, not city air, just pine. Freshly cut wood has a sound too. It's soft, alive, like it remembers the tree it used to be. That sound was the soundtrack of my life for 40 years. I was a carpenter up in Maine. Not the kind who worked for someone else, not the kind who did assembly lines. I had my own shop, Hale and Son Woodworks. Of course, there was never really a son. It was just me, my tools, and later, my little girl running around the sawdust like it was snow. I met Evelyn when I was 25. She was sunlight, loud, confident, had this way of laughing that made every man in the room turn. I was quiet, all calluses and bad posture, but she liked that I built things that didn't fall apart. I guess that's what she wanted, a man who made things that lasted. We bought a small plot by the lake and built our home ourselves. Not bought, built. Every beam, every joint, every nail was ours. It took 20 years to finish. Not because I was slow, but because life kept getting in the way, bills, sickness, raising Julia. But that house stood. It still stands. When I drive by now, I can still see the porch light she picked out, the swing where she used to read to Julia on summer nights. Evelyn was the one who made the house a home. I made walls, she filled them with life. She had a garden that never stopped growing, no matter how cold it got. She'd come into my shop with soil still on her hands, bring me lemonade, lean on the doorway and say, "You think Julia will ever leave this place?" I'd laugh and tell her, "Not a chance. This house is in her blood." Turns out I was wrong. Evelyn got sick when Julia was in college. Cancer. The kind that doesn't care how strong you are. I built her a bed by the window so she could see the lake. She used to joke that even in dying she was living in something I built. I told her that wasn't funny, but she said, "Then stop building things that make people love you so much." When she passed, I stopped building for a while. The hammer didn't sound the same. The sawdust smelled colder. You can't build with grief in your chest. It throws everything off balance. But Julia, she was the reason I started again. After the funeral, she came home for the summer. She sat in the workshop one night, head down on the table, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to say, so I did what I always do. I worked. I pulled out a slab of cherry wood I'd been saving, sanded it down until it was smooth as glass. I told her, "You'll need a desk for when you go back to school." She wiped her eyes, said, "Dad, you don't have to." I said, "I know, but I want to." That desk, solid cherry, hand-polished, simple lines, was my way of saying everything I couldn't out loud. It wasn't just furniture. It was love, patience, and faith carved into form. I remember carrying it into her dorm room, setting it by the window. She hugged me that day and said, "You build better than you talk, Dad." She wasn't wrong. Years later, when she started her company, she still used that same desk. She even posted a picture online once where the dream began. I saw it and smiled. She didn't mention me, but I didn't need her to. The desk said enough. When I moved to Boston after Evelyn passed, it wasn't for me. It was for Julia. I sold the house by the lake, left behind the shop, and took a small apartment near her new place. The city was loud, impatient. Nobody looked up. The air tasted like metal. I missed the sound of the lake brushing against the shore, missed the way the morning light fell across Evelyn's garden. But every time I saw Julia, all grown up, confident, I told myself it was worth it. She'd come by sometimes, quick visits, always in a hurry. "Dad, I can't stay long. I've got meetings." Or, "Sorry, I can't do dinner tonight, maybe next week." I'd nod, smile, say, "I'll be here." And I was every time. That's the thing about being a father, you stay. You stay when it's inconvenient, when it's quiet, when no one's looking. You stay because leaving was never part of the job, but I started noticing little changes. The first time she introduced me to her friends, she didn't call me a carpenter. She said, "My dad's retired now." It was small, but it stuck. Then at a dinner one time, someone asked what I used to do, and she said, "He works with wood like furniture and stuff." Like furniture and stuff. The words were so light they barely existed. I wasn't angry, I knew what it was. She was proud of me, just differently now. To her, success meant spotless shoes, big screens, city views, and me. I was from a time when a man's worth was measured by what he built, not what he bought. We spoke two different languages, and love had to translate between them. Sometimes I'd sit in her office lobby waiting for her meeting to end. The receptionist would ask if I had an appointment. I'd say, "No, I'm her father." They'd smile politely, offer me water, and go back to their screens. I'd look around at all the glass and metal and think none of this lasts, because I know things that people in those buildings don't. Steel rusts, wood ages, but it breathes, it survives if you take care of it. That's how people are too. We're not built to be shiny forever, we're built to endure. Maybe that's why it hurts when endurance gets mistaken for irrelevance. The day of her launch event, when she told me not to talk too much, I remembered all of this. The house, the desk, Evelyn's laughter. And I realized she hadn't really changed. She was still that girl at the workbench, wanting things to be perfect, terrified of anyone seeing her mistakes. The only difference was now she hid that fear behind a blazer and a press badge. I wasn't mad at her for being ashamed. I was sad she couldn't see what I saw, that the man she was trying to hide was the reason she stood there in the first place. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that love doesn't always look like gratitude. Sometimes it looks like distance, pride, or even silence. But real love, the kind that lasts longer than the furniture you build, doesn't quit just because the world changes around it. Still, there's a quiet kind of ache that comes from realizing your best years live in someone else's past tense. I'm my dad, the old-fashioned one now, and maybe that's okay. Maybe being old-fashioned just means you remember what people forget. Respect, patience, the beauty of something built by hand. Sometimes, late at night, I still picture that house by the lake. The moonlight spilling across Evelyn's garden, Julia asleep upstairs. I can almost hear the creak of that cherry wood desk as she writes. That's the sound of everything I ever wanted, for her to have a place in the world, one that was steady, hers. She's got that now. But the funny thing about building something steady is that eventually it stands on its own. And when it does, the builder steps back into the shadows. That's where I am now. You can call it old-fashioned if you want. I call it love that's done its job. When Julia told me she and Nathan were moving into a new place, I tried to sound excited. "That's great, sweetheart," I said. "You'll finally have a space that's yours." She smiled, half distracted, scrolling through her phone. "Yeah, it's perfect. Modern, bright. Nathan says it feels more like us." I didn't know what that meant, more like us, but I nodded anyway. I offered to help them move. She said, "It's okay, Dad, we've got people." I laughed it off, but truth is, it stung a little. All my life, moving meant family and sweat, not strangers carrying boxes. A few weeks later, I dropped by to see the place. It was one of those new condos in Cambridge, white walls, glass everywhere, not a nail out of place. Nathan opened the door. He was polite enough, but you can always tell when someone's being polite because they have to be. "Hey, Richard," he said, flashing that kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Glad you could make it. Watch the floor, though, we just had it refinished." I looked down at my work boots. I'd wiped them clean, but still I could see a faint smear of dust where I stepped. I mumbled, "Sorry," and stood still until he said it was fine. Julia came out from the kitchen, hair tied back, radiant. "Dad, come in," she said, hugging me. Her warmth almost made up for Nathan's chill. I handed her a small wrapped box. Inside was a wooden clock I'd made, oak and walnut, with her initials carved on the back. "For your new home," I said. She smiled, but there was something forced about it. "Dad, it's beautiful, but it doesn't really go with the style. We're doing more of a minimalist look." I nodded, pretending I understood. "Sure, minimalist." I glanced around. Everything looked expensive but empty, like a showroom, not a home. No scent of cooking, no mismatched mugs, no clutter of life. Nathan clapped his hands together. "We'll find a spot for it, Richard. Maybe the office." He meant out of sight, I could tell. Sat down for coffee, or rather they had oat milk lattes, I had water. Nathan started talking about investments, market trends, interest rates. I smiled and listened, the way a man does when he knows no one really cares what he thinks. At one point he said, "You know, Julia and I have been thinking it might be nice if you moved somewhere closer to the suburbs. You know, quieter, more your pace." I chuckled softly. "My pace?" He laughed like it was a joke. Yeah, well, your place is great, but it's small and honestly the neighborhood's changing fast. Maybe sell it while the market's up. You could buy something more comfortable. Maybe Maine again, you'd love it there. Julia said nothing. She stirred her coffee, eyes down. I leaned back and nodded slowly. You think I should sell the house? Nathan shrugged. Just a thought. I mean, it's kind of old-fashioned, doesn't really fit the city vibe. Old-fashioned, there's that word again. The polite way people say out of place. Julia finally spoke. Nathan didn't mean anything by it, Dad. We're just saying it might be nice for you to have more space. Fresh air, peace, you know. I smiled, the kind of smile you wear to protect other people's comfort. Sure, I said. I'll think about it. But I didn't need to think. I already knew what they meant. They weren't just talking about my house. They were talking about me. I didn't fit in their world anymore. That night I went home and sat by the window. The city lights blinked in the distance like they were mocking me. I thought about that word, fit. Funny thing is, I spent my whole life making things fit. Joints that wouldn't split, edges that lined up perfectly. Now here I was, the piece that didn't belong. Over the next few weeks, Julia's calls got shorter, then they stopped coming at all. I'd text her once in a while, how's work? How's Nathan? You eating okay? She'd reply with a few words, busy, Dad, all good, or sometimes not at all. I tried calling one evening, straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice said, hey, it's Julia, leave a message and I'll get back to you. I waited for the beep, then said softly, hey, kiddo, just checking in. Don't worry about calling back. I know you're busy, just remember to eat okay. I hung up and sat there, staring at the phone. It didn't ring. There's a strange quiet that settles in when someone you love starts drifting away. It's not loud like heartbreak. It's slow, patient, like watching the tide pull something precious out to sea. You tell yourself it'll come back. You stand there waiting long after the waves have gone still. I tried to understand it logically. Kids grow up. They build their own lives. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. But then there's a part of you that whispers. You gave up your world for theirs. You left everything behind so they'd never feel alone. And then one day you realize they don't even remember what you gave up. I'd see pictures of Julia online, company galas, interviews, magazine spreads. Always smiling, always surrounded by people in suits. The cherry desk I built her used to be in the background, but one day it was gone, replaced by glass and chrome. I stared at that photo for a long time, not angry, just tired. Nathan once said I didn't fit in their world. Maybe he was right. Their world was made of glass, clean, sharp, and easy to break. Mine was made of wood, imperfect, sturdy, and honest. Sometimes I think about that house I built with Evelyn. How we spent years fitting every joint, sanding every edge, never once thinking about whether it fit the world. We just made it fit us. Julia doesn't remember that, or maybe she's trying not to. Maybe it's easier to start fresh when you pretend the foundation never existed. I don't blame her, not really. She's doing what she thinks she has to do to survive. But it still hurts, realizing that somewhere along the way, love became something that needed to match the furniture. So I stopped calling for a while, not out of pride, but out of mercy for her, for me. I figured when she needed me, she'd call. Until then, I kept working. Not on furniture, not for clients, just small projects. Birdhouses, stools, frames. Things that reminded me of who I was before I started trying to fit anywhere else. Because maybe Nathan was right about one thing. I don't fit in their world. But the truth is, I don't need to. I already built mine. It was a Friday night in early spring, one of those evenings where the city feels too bright for its own good. The hotel ballroom glowed with chandeliers and champagne, all gold and laughter, Julia's engagement party. I stood near the back, holding a small wooden box under my arm, a gift I'd made myself. Inside were the keys to the house I'd quietly transferred into her name. I thought maybe that would be my way of saying, I'm proud of you, kiddo. You have everything now. She looked beautiful up there on the stage, her hand looped through Nathan's arm. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked. She had that confidence that used to make me proud, the kind that said she knew where she was going. For a while, I just stood there, smiling like any father would. Then the microphone squealed and she started her speech. I just want to thank everyone who helped me get here. she said, voice steady, eyes sweeping across the crowd. To the mentors who pushed me, to my team for believing in me, and to Nathan for showing me what partnership really means. There was a pause, a deliberate one, I thought. I waited for her to look my way, to say Dad, just once, but she didn't. Instead, she smiled and raised her glass. Here's to new beginnings, to building our own life with our own hands. The room applauded, laughed, toasted, but around me the air turned heavy. Mr. Thompson, an old friend who'd worked with me for years, leaned over. His tie was crooked, his breath thick with whiskey. Did she just forget you? I kept my eyes on the stage and said quietly, maybe she's thanking me in silence. He frowned but didn't press. I don't know what was louder, the music or the beating in my chest. Julia looked out over the crowd, confident and radiant, completely in her world. Then by some strange pull, her gaze met mine for just a second, and in that second everything slowed. Her smile faltered. She knew what she'd done, or maybe what she hadn't done. Her eyes softened like she wanted to say something, but then she looked away. Someone handed her another glass and the moment was gone. Behind me I heard whispers. Is that her dad? He looks uncomfortable. She didn't even mention him. Poor guy. The sound of it burned worse than the silence. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to remind myself this was her night, not mine. Then I felt it, my hand shaking, the wooden box trembling slightly. I gripped it tighter, my thumb pressing against the smooth edge. That box had taken me a week to make, cherry wood, hand-sanded, lined with velvet. Inside were the keys and a note that said, "For the home you'll build just like we built ours." But now it felt heavy, like a mistake. Someone brushed past me, bumping my shoulder, spilling a bit of their drink on my sleeve. They didn't even look back. I stepped away from the crowd, trying to find air. My reflection caught in the mirrored wall a man in a worn suit, hair graying, standing among people half his age. I looked like a guest at the wrong party. Nathan was talking to a group near the stage, laughing that loud laugh people use when they want to sound important. He didn't notice me. Maybe he never would. And Julia, she was glowing, surrounded by people who adored her, people who only knew the polished version of her life, not the one carved out of sweat, debt, and midnight repairs. Mr. Thompson found me again near the doorway. "You all right, Rich?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah. I just remembered something I forgot to do. Want me to tell her you're heading out?" I shook my head. "No, let her have her night." He nodded slowly. "You're a better man than most." I didn't feel like one. I slipped outside before anyone noticed, stepping into the cold rain. The city lights smeared across the wet pavement like watercolor. Cars hissed by, horns echoing in the distance. I stood there a moment under the awning, the wooden box still in my hand. The doorman glanced at me. "You need a cab, sir." I smiled. "No, son, I just need a little air." He nodded politely, went back to his phone. I walked down the street, past the glowing windows and laughter that spilled onto the sidewalk. I could still hear the music from the ballroom behind me, muffled, distant, like it belonged to another lifetime. I stopped under a street lamp, opened the box, and looked at the keys inside. My reflection stared back in the metal, tired, soaked, but still standing. I closed the lid gently, pressed my thumb against the carved initials, J.H. It wasn't anger I felt. Not yet. It was something quieter, colder, disappointment wrapped in understanding. Because I realized something out there in the rain. Love can raise a person so high that they start believing they climbed there on their own. And when that happens, there's nothing left for you to do but step back, let them think they built the ladder. The rain picked up, soaking through my coat. I started walking again, slow, steady. My shoes slapped against the puddles, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Behind me, the hotel shimmered in gold and glass, all warmth and noise. Ahead, the street stretched dark and empty, but honest. For the first time that night, I felt free. Because sometimes the moment you're forgotten is the same moment you finally remember who you are. The rain followed me all the way home that night. Not the kind that roars or flashes with thunder, just the quiet kind. The kind that soaks through your coat and settles into your bones before you even notice. I didn't bother with an umbrella. Some nights it feels right to let the world wash you clean. My shoes hit the pavement in slow, even steps. The sound echoed off the empty streets, steady, almost rhythmic. It reminded me of sanding wood, back and forth, back and forth. The kind of motion you do without thinking, just to keep from feeling. By the time I reached the workshop, the clock was already striking midnight. The old place looked smaller than I remembered, crouched against the wind. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of sawdust and oil hit me, faint but still there, like a ghost that refuses to leave. I hung my coat, wiped the rain from my face, and stood in the middle of the room for a long while. Every tool on the wall had a story. The plane with the worn handle I bought when Julia was born. The chisel that slipped and nearly took off my thumb. The hammer with the dented head I used to build her cradle. I ran my fingers over each one, tracing grooves and scratches like they were scars. They were, in a way, proof that I'd built a life with my hands, proof that I'd once known how to make things solid. The silence in that shop was heavy but not cruel, just honest. The kind of silence that tells the truth you've been avoiding. I sat down at the cherry wood table near the window, the same one I'd made years ago, the one Julia used to sit beside, watching me work. She'd swing her legs and ask, "Why do you always tap the wood before you start cutting?" And I'd tell her, "Because wood talks, kiddo, you just have to listen before you take something from it." Now all I heard was the rain against the glass. I looked at that table for a long time. The grain was still beautiful even after all these years. Cherry darkens with age, it gets richer, deeper, like time rewards it for staying strong. Maybe people are supposed to be the same way, but standing there I didn't feel strong. I felt hollowed out. There's a line that came to me then, clear as the ticking clock on the wall. You build them a table, they stand on it and forget who built it. I let the words hang there. They sounded harsh, but they weren't bitter. Just true. Love is funny like that. It builds things, families, dreams, futures. But love without respect, it's like carving a table with no legs, looks fine for a while until the weight of life drops it flat. I reached for my carving knife. The handle was smooth, the blade dull but steady. I flipped the table over and pressed the tip of the knife against the wood. Slowly I began to carve, not fancy, not polished, just deliberate. The way I used to teach Julia when she was little, one line at a time, always toward the heart. The words came easy, to the daughter who taught me that love without respect is just silence. When I finished, I brushed the dust away, ran my hand over the letters. They weren't perfect, a few curves uneven, a few lines too deep, but that was all right. Real things aren't supposed to be flawless. I sat back in the chair, the same one I'd made from leftover maple. The rain outside had quieted to a soft patter. I could hear the steady ticking of the clock again. Each second felt slower than the last. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to fix or build or plan anything. I just sat there, breathing in the quiet. I realized the shop wasn't empty at all. It was full. Full of everything I'd ever made, everything I'd ever given. It was my life, pressed into wood and time. I thought about Julia, how small her hands used to look when she held a paintbrush trying to copy me. How she once told me, "When I grow up, I'll make things just like you." And she did, just not the way I expected. She built her own world, her own version of beauty. Maybe that's all any of us are doing, building tables the next person will forget we made. I smiled then. It wasn't pride exactly, and it wasn't peace either. It was something quieter, acceptance maybe. I ran my hand across the words one more time and whispered, "It's all right, kiddo. You don't have to remember me. Just don't forget where you learned to stand." Outside, the rain stopped. The last drop slid down the window like tears that had finally decided to fall. I turned off the light, the room dipping into a warm kind of darkness. The table gleamed under the faint moonlight, scarred, strong, alive. Some things break and stay broken, but some they bend, they scar, and somehow they become more beautiful because of it. That night I didn't feel like a man who'd lost something. I felt like a man who'd left something behind, something solid, something that would outlast the silence. It was a gray afternoon when she showed up at my door. The kind of day when the sky looks like it can't decide whether to cry or not. I hadn't heard from her since the engagement party. Then suddenly, there she was, Julia, standing on the porch with Nathan right behind her, both of them dressed too nicely for my old neighborhood. I wiped my hands on a rag, still smelling of varnish, and opened the door. "Well," I said, "this is a surprise." She didn't smile. "Can we come in?" I stepped aside. They walked in like they were visiting a museum, eyes darting around at the walls, the old photos, the uneven floorboards. Nathan's polished shoes squeaked against the wood. The air felt heavy already. I poured coffee, offered it, but they both shook their heads. That's when I knew this wasn't a visit, it was a confrontation. Julia folded her arms. "Dad, I need to say this before it festers. You embarrassed me at the party." I stared at her, trying to understand which part embarrassed her, the gift, the silence, or just me being there. "How so?" I asked softly. She sighed, looking away. "You showed up looking poor. Everyone was dressed for a formal event, and you came in that old suit with your wooden box." I felt something twist in my chest. I nodded slowly. So, it wasn't what I said. It was how I looked. Nathan cleared his throat, stepping in like a lawyer defending a case. "Richard, look, you have to understand, she's worked hard to build a certain image. Perception matters, especially in her field. People talk, it's not personal." I smiled faintly. "Not personal," I repeated. "Just about image, got it." Julia crossed her arms tighter. "It's not just about image, Dad. You made it awkward. You sat alone. You didn't talk to anyone. Everyone asked who you were, and I didn't know what to say without making it weird." That one hurt more than I expected. "Weird," I said quietly. "So now I'm the family secret." "Don't twist my words," she snapped. Nathan's parents were there, my investors, people who matter. You don't get how much pressure I was under." I let the words settle before answering. "Maybe what embarrassed you wasn't me," I said finally. "Maybe it was remembering where you came from." That stopped her cold. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "You can't guilt her forever, Richard," he said, his voice firm now. "She's building her life. You should be proud instead of clinging to the past." I turned to him. "You're right, son, she is building her life. I just didn't realize it required tearing down the old one." Nathan started to speak again, but Julia raised her hand. "Don't, Nathan, he won't get it." I looked at her, really looked at her. The expensive clothes, the perfect hair, the confidence that used to be curiosity. Somewhere along the way, the little girl who once built birdhouses with me learned to measure her worth in likes, deals, and headlines. "I do get it," I said quietly. "You want to belong to the world you built. You want to prove you're more than the daughter of a carpenter. I understand that, Julia. But the thing is, no matter how far you go, the floor you're standing on is still made of wood I cut." She opened her mouth, but no words came. The room fell still except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. It was the same clock her mother bought for our first house. The sound used to comfort me. Now it just counted the distance between us. Finally, Julia looked around and said, "This house, it's too small for you, Dad. You deserve something nicer. Let me help you sell it. We could find you a better place. Maybe closer to," I laughed softly. "Better place, you mean cleaner, shinier?" She frowned. "I'm trying to help." "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady now. "You're trying to erase." That hung in the air. Nathan looked at the floor. Julia's eyes watered, but she blinked it away. I turned, walked to the old cabinet near the window, and opened the drawer. Inside was an envelope I'd sealed days before the party. I took it out and placed it on the table between us. "What's this?" she asked. I pushed it toward her. "It's the deed to the house, the one by the lake, the one your mother and I built." She hesitated. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because maybe it's time you see what's yours and what's not." Her face softened, confused. "Dad, I don't." "This house," I said, tapping the paper, "was supposed to be your wedding gift. The keys were in that box you didn't want to open. I was going to give it to you that night. But then I realized some gifts don't belong to people who have forgotten what they mean." Nathan took a breath. "You're being unfair." I looked him straight in the eye. "Maybe, but fairness isn't the same as truth." He looked away. Julia just stood there, silent, staring at the paper like it was written in another language. Her hands trembled slightly. After a moment, I added quietly, "You don't owe me anything, Julia. Not time, not gratitude, not appearances. But don't ever think that being ashamed of where you came from makes you stronger. It just makes you lost. I picked up my coffee, still warm, and sat back down at the table. You two should go, you've got a life to build. She didn't move at first, then she nodded slowly. Goodbye, Dad. They left without another word, the door clicked shut. I sat there listening to the silence that followed. It wasn't angry or bitter, it was the kind of silence that comes when something heavy finally falls into place. Outside, I heard their car start, the tires crunching against the gravel as they drove away. I looked down at the envelope still on the table. I hadn't signed it, not yet. Maybe one day I would, or maybe not. A few weeks passed after that visit. The phone stayed quiet, the mailbox stayed empty. No apologies, no explanations, but that was all right. I wasn't waiting for either anymore. One morning I woke up before sunrise like I always did when I used to work. The world was still dark, still honest. I brewed some coffee, sat by the window, and looked out at the trees bending in the wind. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt clean. That's when I made up my mind. I went into the workshop and pulled out a folder I'd been keeping in the drawer. The house deed, the savings, the retirement fund, everything. I'd spent my life building for other people. For Evelyn, for Julia, for a future I thought I was supposed to hand over. But maybe it was time to build something that outlived the both of us. There's a small organization downtown called Hands of Wood. I'd visited it once years ago, just a few volunteers teaching woodworking to kids from foster care. Some of those kids looked at a piece of scrap lumber like it was the first solid thing they'd ever held. I remember thinking back then, these are the kind of hands the world forgets, so I called them, told them I wanted to make a donation. The woman on the other end sounded surprised when I said how much. "Mr. Hale," she said, "are you sure?" "More sure than I've been about anything in years," I told her. I transferred everything, every cent, every property. Signed my name slowly at the bottom of each page. It didn't feel like giving something away. It felt like setting something free. That afternoon, I walked to the workshop and stood in front of the old cherrywood table, the same one I'd carved that night after the rain, the one with Julia's name hidden underneath. I ran my hand across its surface, smooth, strong, alive. Then I smiled and whispered, "Let's build one more." I started with the same kind of cherry wood, but this time I didn't sand out all the imperfections. I left the knots, the scars, the small burns from the saw. It wasn't meant to be perfect. It was meant to tell the truth. For days I worked quietly. No phone, no music, no thoughts louder than the rhythm of the hammer. There's something healing about the sound of wood meeting steel. Every strike feels like forgiveness. When I finished, I flipped the table over and carved a line into the bottom, steady and slow, the way I used to teach Julia, one cut for each breath, built by a father who finally learned where love ends and respect begins. I sat back and looked at it for a long time. The letters weren't fancy, just honest, like me. The next morning, I delivered the table to the Hands of Wood Center myself. The kids were already there, covered in sawdust and laughter. The smell of pine and glue filled the air. One of the volunteers, a woman about Julia's age, walked up to me and said, "This is beautiful. Who's it for?" I smiled. "For whoever needs it most." She looked at me curiously. "Did you make it yourself?" I nodded, "every inch." She ran her hand along the edge. "You know," she said, "we've been short on tables. This one will be perfect for teaching the kids how to start." "Good," I said quietly. "That's what it's for." When I left, the kids were gathered around it, arguing about who got to sit where. One boy, small, messy hair, tapped the surface and said, "Feels solid." I laughed as I walked out the door. Yeah, solid. That's all I ever wanted something I built to be. Later that night, back in the workshop, I stood in the doorway and took it all in. The smell of sawdust, the soft hum of the city beyond the window, the faint echo of children's laughter still ringing in my ears. I realized then that I hadn't really lost anything. I just stopped giving away pieces of myself to people who didn't know how to hold them. Revenge doesn't always need anger. Sometimes it's just peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop proving your worth to people who stopped listening. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon, raised it toward the empty chair where Evelyn's picture sat, and whispered, "You'd like this one, Evie. It's not perfect, but it'll last." Outside, the evening light stretched long and golden, glinting off the wood dust on my hands. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt exactly what I'd spent my whole life trying to give to someone else. Content, respect, quiet justice. The call came early on a Monday morning. I didn't answer. It wasn't my problem anymore. But I knew she'd find out eventually. Julia always thought she was untouchable, that money would move for her the way I used to. But when she went to the bank, they told her what I'd already decided. I wouldn't co-sign the loan, not this time. Not for her company, not for her pride. By noon, the news spread through the investors. Without my backing, her deal fell apart in a matter of days. And by the end of the week, Nathan was gone too. He didn't leave with a fight, just a text. "It's not you, it's timing." Funny thing, timing. It's the one tool you can't control no matter how steady your hands are. I heard about the rest from Mr. Thompson. He said she sold her car, laid off her team, and moved out of that fancy condo. All I said was, she'll figure it out. But that night when I turned off the workshop light, I left it unlocked, just in case. A few days later, I heard the door creak open while I was upstairs. The steps were slow, unsure. I stayed quiet. She didn't call my name. She just wandered, the way you do when you're walking through a place that used to belong to you. The smell of sawdust must have hit her first. Then the sound, the faint hum of rain against the roof. She hadn't been in that workshop since college. Back when she used to sit on the counter, swinging her legs, asking 1,000 questions about tools and glue and patience. Now she walked like a stranger in her own memory. She stopped at the workbench. The new cherry table I'd been building for the kids at Hands of Wood was there, unfinished, the grain still rough, the legs not yet attached. She ran her hand along the edge and whispered, "You were making another one." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I didn't move. Then she looked to the corner, saw the old table, the first one. The one she'd once written papers on, painted on, spilled coffee on. The one that carried her whole childhood without complaint. She crouched beside it, tracing the familiar grooves, the scratches, the small burn mark from the night she'd left a candle too close. She smiled a little, one of those smiles that hurts worse than crying. Then, as she tilted her head, she noticed the carving underneath. She reached for it, brushed the dust away, and read the words slowly, her voice trembling. "Love without respect is just silence." For a long moment she didn't move. Then her knees gave out and she sank to the floor. Her sobs filled the room, the kind that come from somewhere deeper than the lungs, the kind that sound like years of pride cracking all at once. I closed my eyes upstairs. I didn't need to see it. Some lessons aren't meant to be watched, they're meant to be lived. She cried until the rain outside stopped. Then the room went quiet again. I could hear her footsteps move closer to the new table. She sat down at it slowly, like she was afraid it might break. I peeked through the stairwell then, just enough to see her sitting there, her fingers tracing the rough edges of the unfinished wood. She looked small again. The city woman was gone. The little girl was back. Her hand stopped moving, and in a whisper so soft I almost didn't hear it, she said, "Dad, I see you now." There it was, the only apology I ever needed, not in words but in understanding. She stayed a while longer, just sitting there, head bowed, hands resting on the wood like it was the only thing holding her up. Then she stood, wiped her face, and turned toward the door. Before leaving, she looked around the shop one last time. And for a moment her eyes landed on my tools, hanging on the wall exactly as they always had. She smiled, small, tired but real. Then she turned off the light and walked out. When the door closed, the silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything finally said without speaking. And somewhere deep inside, I whispered back, "I see you too, kiddo." I was sanding down a set of chair legs when I saw her through the window. The kids were inside, laughing, glue on their hands, sawdust in their hair, pure chaos, the kind that smells like life. And there she was, standing just outside the door of the Hands of Wood workshop, wearing the same coat she used to hate because it smelled like pine. She hesitated before stepping in. Her eyes darted around the room at the tools, the shavings, the old radio playing faint blues. Then she saw me. For a second, neither of us said anything. Time just stood still like the air was holding its breath. Finally, she spoke. "You built everyone's future but forgot your own." I looked at her, smiling softly. "No, Jules, this is my future." She frowned a little like she didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Then she glanced at the group of kids watching us curiously. One of them, a boy with a crooked smile, handed her a block of wood. "Wanna help?" he said. She laughed through her tears, nodded, and sat down next to me. I handed her a piece of sandpaper. She held it awkwardly at first, rubbing too fast. I covered her hand gently, slowing her rhythm. "Easy," I whispered. "Wood doesn't like to be rushed. You've got to earn its trust first." She smiled at that. "Guess I still have a lot to learn." "Maybe," I said, "but you're learning in the right place." We worked in silence for a while, the sound of sanding filling the room, soft, steady, alive. Every few minutes I'd glance over. She looked different now, not just older, softer. Like life had finally stripped away the armor she'd built around herself. When the class ended, the kids ran out laughing. Julia and I stayed behind, sweeping the floor together. It felt peaceful. She leaned on the broom handle and said quietly, "I don't know how to say sorry, Dad, not in a way that fixes what I broke." I shook my head. "Then don't. Some things don't need words." She looked at me, searching my face. "Then how do we start again?" I thought for a moment, then said, "With a pact." She raised an eyebrow. "A pact?" "Yeah, 3 rules." I wiped my hands on a rag and counted them off on my fingers. 1. No apologies. We fix things by showing up, not by talking about them. She nodded slowly. "Okay." 2. Every Sunday, you me this place, not because we have to, but because we want to. Her eyes softened. "I can do that." And 3, I paused, looking toward the corner of the workshop where the cherry wood table stood, gleaming under the afternoon light. "That table stays with us, always. No matter where we are, it's the witness, the reminder of what respect costs and what it gives back." Julia walked over to it, running her hand along the smooth surface. "It's still beautiful," she whispered. "It aged well," I said, "like someone I know." She laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. Then she turned, eyes shining. "You're still teaching lessons, huh? Only to those willing to listen." She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around me. Not a polite hug, not the kind people give out of guilt. This one was different, tight, honest, trembling a little. I closed my eyes and rested my chin on her hair. "You smell like sawdust," I said. She laughed through a sniffle. "Guess it runs in the family." We stayed like that for a moment, 2 flawed people finally finding the rhythm again. When she pulled away, she looked around and said, "You know, these kids, they remind me of me. Hungry to build something, scared to fail. Then help them." I said, "You've got more to teach than you think." She picked up a chisel, testing its weight. "You'll have to show me how to use this again." "I will," I said. "But first rule, no shortcuts." She grinned. "You and your rules. Someone's gotta keep them straight." Outside, the sun dipped low, casting gold through the dusty windows. For once, it didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like the start of something solid, something earned. We went back to sanding, side by side, 2 sets of hands moving in quiet rhythm. No apologies, no promises, just the sound of wood and the slow, steady piece of rebuilding what was never truly lost. The years moved like the tide, slow, steady, inevitable. The workshop grew louder, fuller. What started as a few broken chairs and borrowed tools became something alive, something that carried pieces of me long after I was gone. The kids who once needed help became teachers themselves. They fixed what others would have thrown away. They built their futures, one cut, one scar, one lesson at a time. And above the door of the Hands of Wood Center, someone hung a new sign carved from oak, in honor of the craftsman who taught dignity by silence. I wasn't there to see it go up, but I didn't need to be. That wasn't the point. The work was never about being remembered. It was about leaving behind something that could stand on its own. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Julia stood in front of that same sign. The sunlight hit the gold letters, and for a second, you could almost see me in the reflection. She smiled the way her mother used to, softly, like forgiveness was finally easy to carry. She turned to the group of new students gathered around a half-built table. Her voice was calm, steady, a little husky from sawdust and time. "My father," she began, "used to say that love isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout to be real. It's built quietly, layer by layer, like wood. And if you cut it wrong, it cracks forever." The room went still. The kids listened, really listened. Some looked down at their hands, rough from learning, young but already marked by effort. She walked over to the cherrywood table, the same one she once cried under years ago, and placed her hand on its surface. The carving underneath had darkened with age but still caught the light. "Love without respect is just silence," she read softly. "He carved that when he thought I wasn't listening. Turns out, I just needed time to hear it." She looked up, smiling through tears. "We don't teach respect by demanding it," she said. "We teach it by walking away until people notice what's missing." A hush filled the room, the kind of quiet that carries weight, the kind that doesn't need to be broken. Outside, a few of the older students were hanging a new plaque beside the door. It read, "Built by hands that believed in second chances." Julia picked up a chisel from the bench and twirled it between her fingers the way I used to. "All right," she said, grinning at the class, "enough stories. Let's get back to work. We've got tables to build." The sound of laughter filled the room again, wood creaking, sandpaper brushing, the smell of oil and sawdust mixing with something lighter. Hope, maybe. Renewal. And if you stood far enough away, listening to that steady rhythm, you might have thought it was me again, hammering quietly in the corner, still teaching without saying a word. So if you're watching this and someone comes to mind, someone who built part of you, someone you maybe forgot to thank, don't wait for the right time. Call them tonight. Because respect, once gone, is the one thing you can't rebuild.